Today I talked to Toby Louie, and one of my favorite things that we end up talking about is the birth of his daughter and how that changed his life, both as a person and as a public servant. And so stay tuned for that conversation.
I grew up in Macau. Not too many people know. It's part of China now, and it's quite the gambling resort. I was quite young when we then moved to Hong Kong, and our family moved to Victoria. And since the 1970s, Victoria has been my home, and I've been fortunate enough to go to school in Victoria, go to university in Victoria, and get a job in Victoria.
It's such a nice city.
Most definitely.
And so what was the reason your family picked Canada to move to when you were younger?
My grandfather was already here, and we had other relatives and family. I think it's a fantastic spot. It was more of a bit of a reunification of the family. It was my mom, my dad, and three other siblings, but I don't think they could have picked a better place to be.
And being how old were you when your family moved?
I was 5, and it was completely new. And of course, being young, one of the first things I said after a couple hours of being here, I said to my mom, "So when are we going back home?" And of course, when you're 5, you don't realize this is your new home, and being young also has its advantages because you can assimilate, you can learn the language. And for me, English was not my first language. In our household, we spoke Cantonese, and I think for us it's more, and me trying to adjust and be part of Canada and the culture. So, English is, people are don't even think of this. They think that I've probably grew up and spoke English all my life, but English is actually technically my second language.
Right. And that is, since you are a first-generation immigrant, I guess there's obviously you and your parents had different experiences moving here and kind of getting used to Canadian culture and being uprooted from where your family's from and stuff like that. And like you said, I think it is a lot easier for younger kids to learn new things. I mean, we certainly know it's easier for them to learn languages and stuff like that. So that must have been an interesting dynamic to be speaking English and hanging out with the kids at school, and kind of, I imagine you were young enough that it was, I hope, seamless for you, but for your parents, I imagine it was difficult.
I think so, because they actually didn't speak English as well, and they actually had to learn English. It's quite remarkable when I look back that they both took English lessons, but they also took it to a point where they wrote the citizenship exam or took the test, and they passed. I'm so grateful. But it is more difficult. I think it was more difficult for them. And you're right. Being young and growing up, it was more seamless. It has its challenges, and I'm looking back, there's some funny stories, but it also wasn't so much the language, but it's also the culture. There's things that you're just not used to in terms of what you expect, and so that was all fairly new. But I am very fortunate that being young and having a chance to grow up, make friends. Go through the school system here in Victoria. It's been all good.
Mm. So one interesting thing I know about you is that you are a very skilled speech writer, and you've written some speeches and prepared materials for some pretty high level folks, including ministers and that sort of thing. I'm curious, was reading, writing, editing, like speech writing, was that something that you were always good at, like from a young age, or was that a skill you picked up? Or
I think I must have just stepped into it because, as we talked earlier about this, English, is my second language, and it's never was something that I could have actually imagined that I would have done. And at some points, people said, "Hey, you are actually a pretty good speechwriter here," and for ministers. I had one minister that actually loved the style of what I wrote for him, but some stories of it would be I think I struggled too with English because being a second language. In junior high, I had a setback. I failed English, or the teacher, and I'm actually very grateful now. At the time, you're not. Teacher said, we should hold you back and maybe have you take English again. It's hard when your other friends are going forward and you've got this setback. So yeah, it's ironic that I failed English. I had to take it again. I guess I'm not sure if it's failing. Also through university, when I applied, my English was not very strong, so I actually had to take a supplemental exam just so I didn't have to repeat grade 12 again, English, before my university courses. So I look back and I think, it's quite remarkable that I'm doing what I'm doing, or what I had done, and to have English as a strong suit now, but it wasn't always there.
Do you think that that early failures sort of made you focus and work harder on English, and as a result, you got very skilled? Like, is there a way that failure, in some ways, contributed to your ability to be a good speechwriter now, do you think?
I don't think I would have thought of that at the time. The thing I think is more, I avoided it because my strengths were not writing. It was not English at the time, certainly going through school or university. And I think in my undergraduate university, I shied away from it, and economics was a strong suit because you didn't have to write papers, you didn't have to do a lot of writing in economics. I think what I did learn is there's some things that just happen that you just have to learn to adapt. It wasn't so much here's a setback that you're gonna be really good at this. I wouldn't say that I aspired to be a writer. I have one good funny story I should share with you just to drive home this point, but it's not something I would say that, hey, I had this setback and I'm actually going to be the best writer I can.
It wasn't a conscious sort of. It didn't in a way make you like really determined to like, oh, I'm gonna be an excellent speechwriter because I was embarrassed, and it was more just kind of a natural consequence of the way things turned out. It sounds like. Yeah,
absolutely. It was adapting. I think it's more, hey, if you're going to actually be doing this, do certain things in terms of your work and assignments. There's things you just have to adapt and you have to adjust, and you just have to be as best as you can on it. And I never actually looked back at it as a motivating factor by saying, there's a setback here, but I'm going to be really good at it.
Mm. And so, what about? I'm curious, what about your speeches did that minister like, or do people like in your writing and in your editing? Like, what can you pinpoint it? Have you gotten feedback about that? Or
I think it was just a good match with that minister. I've written for a number of ministers over the years, but for that one particular minister, I think what he liked was he liked the brevity. What was new was rather than here's a very scripted word-by-word speech. He liked the prompts. He liked some brevity. He liked the conciseness. He liked sort of the structure of how the thoughts and the points were conveyed. Basically, the construction of the speech. Not so much here's the flowery points. And I'm not a flowery kind of person. I don't know 3-4 syllable words. It was very personal in that sense, and there was that connection that worked. And part of it because it was my style. I'm not a speechwriter, so this is not like a speech by a speechwriter. It was more, here's something you can actually talk about. Here's the point you should actually convey, and it was all very natural. It was very simple. I think those are the things that made it successful.
what's coming up for me when you talk about you were writing the speeches as not as someone who is um, a public speaker necessarily, but you were just writing. And it strikes me that it's so true that writing and delivering are totally different skills, even in the realm of public speaking. The ability to write a good speech or write some good prompts or whatever it is totally different from delivering. And some people are great at both. Some people are specialized in one. And yeah.
It worked out really well, and I think now because you've sort of asked that question, and I never really thought of it too much, was I think sometimes if you're not the professional speech writer or you do it as a career, it was different. It was different. It hit the mark. Luckily, it hit the mark, and from then it actually it builds confidence. You actually want to do a little more of it. You get a sense of saying, hey, maybe this works. And you develop your style, and I think the recipients of it actually appreciate it, and they kind of like that style.
Okay, I want to go back up a little bit and to a time before you were an executive director, to a time before you wrote speeches for ministers, and talk a bit about what some of the pivotal moments in your career are. Like looking back. Can you identify pretty major turning points in your career? And if so, what are those?
I'd say, there's things probably earlier in my life, in my career, that I would say are pivotal or meaningful points. One would be, for some reason, I've always wanted to go to law school or be a lawyer. And that was my sort of desire, get the undergraduate degree, go to law school. This would have been the late 80s. And I did all the prep, made sure my marks were good, wrote the law school entrance exam, got my applications ready, looked at which law schools. I was looking at UVic. And then it dawned on me, there's some things, why do I really want to do this and why? At the time, UVic has a fantastic law school back then and even now. But the issue for me was it's more practical. And I think that's what's also shaping who I am and what I do and where I'm going. Practical in the sense that law school at that time, there was no guarantee and you'll get a job. The law school at UVic was just in its early starting days of having a co-op program. And I was thinking, geez, I could take a 3-year program, spend lots of money. There's no co-op program to help offset tuition or the costs. I could stay at home, which would be cheaper, but there was also no guarantee that I would get a job or what type of job I could get. And then I happened to stumble upon a public administration program at UVic. And it wasn't very well known at that time in the 80s, or it's not widely known. It had a co-op program. So, your traditional 4 months in school, 4 months do a co-op and make some money. And it was actually very attractive. It was attractive in the sense that, hey, I could actually make some money, help offset the costs of an education, build up my resume, get some experience, and it's been fantastic. So I look back at that by saying, there's no regrets. I think that actually helps me, it helped me actually pursue sort of public service and basically where I am today.
And so it's funny you mentioned, not funny, but it's just interesting to me that you mentioned law school. That was something I was also considering. I also wrote the entrance exam and got ready to apply, and then decided, actually for similar reasons, that I didn't want to go. Like I didn't want to rack up that much debt. I didn't have the financial support from my family to be able to make it a bit more reasonable, and so I ended up just working right after my undergraduate degree. But what was it about being? You obviously didn't go down that path, but what was it about being a lawyer that was attractive to you? Was it just was the work interesting? Was it more just like a traditionally successful sort of line of work? What was it?
I think part of it was helping represent people to kind of seek justice, and it's more, here's people that might be the underdog, or helping people find a resolution or justice when you're up against, say, a big company or something that government has done. That was appealing, and maybe part of it was growing up, being an immigrant, first generation Chinese Canadian. There's injustices that you see, and there's some things you think, geez, I'd like to fix that. And it wasn't in a big scale. There'd be small things, but there'd be irksome type things. So for me, it was nice to be able to fall upon and use the law and help people if they have injustices or see things. So that was part of it. And the other, it's true. It's a well-known, respected profession. And growing up, it's like make sure you do something that not only that you like, or do something where it's a well-regarded profession. And at that time, it was kind of like success. If success in the eyes of the parents or the family.
Yeah. To have a doctor or a lawyer in the family, right? That's a big deal for the folks. Yeah, yeah. So after you did that, what was your first job in the BC Public Service?
I was hired on an auxiliary basis. In fact, maybe I was actually on a contract. I worked in the Court Services branch of the Ministry of Attorney General, and at that time it was the early 90s, and my job was more on reporting of court statistics. And we think of it now. We actually don't think of it. We don't even second guess it. But at the time, we were starting out with executive information, or the dashboards, performance metrics. It was just starting out, and it was a great job looking at court statistics, court delay, number of court cases, court hours, but trying to distill that into some metrics and into programs that decision makers can have a look at quite easily. So it was a great introduction to government, a great introduction to the court system, and it's ironic. I wanted to go to law school, but I ended up actually in a justice field, or in the courts field. So it was a good fit there.
Right. My first job with the BC Public Service was, I'm a trained social worker, but I wasn't able to get a job as a social worker right when I graduated. So I actually worked as a court clerk for a while at the Victoria Courthouse before I got a job in as a social worker in Vancouver, and moved over there and worked there. But I loved it. Like it was super entry level, handing up files and folders to the judges, going and getting them from their chambers, and doing that sort of stuff. Super basic sort of tasks, but I thought it was just so cool to work in the courthouse and interact with, the prosecutors, defense counsel, and the judges and stuff like that. That was fascinating to me.
I'm sure there's so much you see. The court registries are so busy, but you're absolutely right. The public's there. You have the participants, the judges, the lawyers, the prosecutors. It is just a hub of activity, and I'm sure you probably saw lots and did lots of things just being in the registry.
Yeah, it was like there were some. Some hours and days when you'd be in trials or court proceedings where there's a lot of administrative, technical maneuvering, and it was really boring. And then other times you'd be involved in criminal matters, criminal trials, and stuff like that, and all of that was super super interesting. So. You had that first job, and then what?
It was a I think it was a opportune time or a chance encounter. There was an executive director who was on a temporary assignment at Court Services. And I think she and I actually made a connection. And she actually, because she was on a temporary assignment, that was not her home base, but she had offered me an opportunity to do issues management and communications, which is completely different than what I was doing. It's different than what I went to school with, and wasn't something that I thought that I would do. And part of it, I think the connection was, outside of work, I'm just a voracious reader in terms of media and the news. And it's so easy now. You can pick up your tablet, pick up your phone, and in the 90s, I would, instead of picking up a tablet, I'd quite easily on a weekend pick up 4 or 5 newspapers, and I would like to just read 4 or 5 newspapers, and I would do that quite often. I think part of that was the connection where this executive director said, if you have an interest in this, in following the news and in reading all these articles, you might have a knack or have some skills in terms of communications and issues management. So that was a pivotal moment for me, in the sense that it actually changed the direction of where I was thinking I was going career-wise. To be honest, when you first start off, you're not sure where you really want to go, but it really did help shape where I was going to go in the next 20 plus years in government and in the public service. And that sort of led, as we talked about earlier, about speech writing. It wasn't, again, I wasn't hired on to be like a speech writer, but when you do sort of issues management at that time, it is trying to respond. It is trying to, provide context of some stories. It's trying to provide information to ministers or deputies or others to try and actually get another side of the story that's out there.
And so when you talk about issues management, first of all, how long were you in the issues management job for? A couple of years?
I'm sure like 4 or 5 years or so.
4 or 5 years. Yeah. And at what level were you dealing with issues? Was it like the branch level, division level, ministry level? Like what? I'm just trying to get a sense for where that position was embedded and what you were dealing with.
It was the Attorney General's ministry, and it would be for the whole ministry.
Okay.
And it would be issues management for the minister. It would be... It was novel at that time because we had created sort of an issues management team of 3 individuals that would work closely in a communications office or shop. My skill was not so much on the communications side. I was brought in more on the policy side. That if you're looking at these issues or looking at a response, you want to make sure that you also put a bit of a policy lens on. You just can't go out there and say, well, here's a context or response. It's to actually try and put a bit of a policy lens on some of the responses. So it'd be for the whole ministry. It would be for a minister.
Stuff that was in the media, for example, kind of higher level issues that yes. The minister was being asked to respond to, either because he or she was getting hammered in the house, or if there was something, a crisis going on or something like that.
Yes.
So it was at a pretty high level.
Yeah.
So, and you worked in the justice sort of public safety sector from the start, right? For your whole career to date.
Yes,
so.
Yes,
Yeah.
And I'm very fortunate. It's changed, ministry names and organizations with, structures within organizations change over that time. But I've been very fortunate to be in a justice or public safety ministry or the sector. As I mentioned, Court Services, Ministry of Attorney General, right up through till 2001. There was a split of the Justice Ministry into an Attorney General and a Public Safety Ministry. So I was part of that, and I moved into the public safety realm in 2001. And then the 2 ministries again merged, I can't remember, like 2016 or so. And again, I was part of one unified ministry, and then the ministry split again, and now I'm on the public safety side, and still am, and I'm sure there'll be other changes along the way, but it's been great. I think it's good to be in the sort of the justice and public safety sector from my perspective.
So when I was sorry, I'm just being selfish for a moment, trying to think of when I worked for the court services branch. So it would have been, it was before 2016. So it would have been Attorney General, like the court services branch in the Attorney General.
That's correct.
Okay. So I've talked to had a couple of guests on the podcast, and it's interesting to me to look at people's careers and see some people, broadly speaking, there are of course exceptions, but it seems to me that there's two kind of styles of careers that I've kind of come across, and one is that people just kind of go wherever there's opportunity, whatever ministry, whatever sector in the public service, they think that will be a good fit for their skills. And so there's people like that kind of move around a lot and have worked in a bunch of different ministries and a bunch of different areas. Then there's a second type of career style where people kind of make a home in one, either in one ministry or in one sort of sector in the public service. And I work for the Ministry of Children and Family Development, and so I work with both types of people that have both sort of styles. I work with a lot of people that are quote unquote lifers in MCFD, and they found success there, or they're comfortable there, or they're really passionate about the portfolio, and so they stay there for most of their careers. And then there's other people that move around a bit more. So you strike me as more the first. Without pigeonholing, you strike me as more of the first kind of type, in that you've worked in a couple of ministries, but you've been in the justice public sector for your entire career with the BC Public Service. So what do you think are the advantages of that?
It's a good question. I think it's up to the individual. For me, being in sort of one sector or two ministries, you do get this history. You do see things. You see the same. You see people. You interact with people commonly. I guess the sense I get is you build up some experience and history being in one place. You know how the sector works. You see issues that sometimes come back. There may have been a project or something from several years ago, but you'll see things come back. You'll see the same type of issues or concerns. It's good in that sense. You also build a bit of a connection to the people that work in that ministry, whether they're there for a long time or whether they're just stopping for a couple of years as part of their career. But you do make that connection. And the other piece is people also come to you, people within the sector, within the ministry, because they say, hey, it's hard to find somebody who's been around for a long time or might know some of the history. And you have that history and that richness. You can kind of explain how decisions have been made. It's nice to actually be part of a sector, I think, because you get comfortable with it. But it's not because it's the same issues. It actually makes you think of things that have happened before, so you learn from the past. You just bring a different perspective, I think.
I just wrote down a couple of things while you were talking, because I was trying to hold in my mind some of the things you were saying, but then also actively listen to you. And you mentioned a couple of key things there, and the three things I pulled out of what you said that kind of resonate for me are the first thing is, if you're around in one ministry or one sector for a while, for 15, 20, 25 years, a good chunk of your career, you get a sense of the corporate knowledge of the place. So you understand the history. You can remember when this ministry was 2, and then before that it was 1, and the expanding and contracting of programs, and leaders coming and going, and also some of the significant paradigm shifting like issues in the media that impacted programs and stuff like that. But then there's also the second thing is relationships. So you develop relationships with people just because you're around for so long and you see some of the same sort of people. And then thirdly, you build up some, provided you do decent work, you build up some credibility. And so people end up coming to you to get that sort of corporate, historical corporate perspective on things. Do you see there being any drawbacks to working in one?
I think there's some that have expectations that you get more fulsome experience and more exposure if you have different issues or you work in different places, and that's absolutely true. The justice sector in the 2 ministries are fairly large. It's different. Some of our issues are different than, say, a smaller ministry that you go to, or different types of focus. It's not healthcare, it's not environment. I think being in those other ministries or other places, it does open up your eyes. It gives you a different perspective. You see different issues. You see more of a whole of government rather than here's your one world or lens. I think it depends on the individuals and their experiences and what they would like to see and get from their careers. I've been fortunate that even though I've been in one sector or 2 ministries, I've had a diversity of projects. So even though I've been in one place, there's things that I've worked on that are been different. Like from, I mentioned early on in terms of court services, the issues management where you see the issues across the ministry, to where I am now, I'm working on consumer protection policies. It wasn't something that I thought I would move into. So even within, my advice is even if you are within one area, there's so much opportunities to do different things even within a ministry.
Just talking about, before we were talking a bit about pivotal moments and moments in your life when things change and you end up heading in a different direction than you initially thought, or for example, like when that leader you mentioned earlier kind of, identified that, you're interested in the newspaper and maybe issues management is right for you, or you would be good at it. Can you talk a bit about some of the, if there are any, I'm sure there are some, and any of the more personal kind of like pivotal moments for you? Like, do you have a family?
Yeah, I have an adult daughter. We have an adult daughter. I'm married. I think I look back at it now, and I think a very pivotal moment is when we had our daughter and we had a family. People talk about work-life balance, and they talk about balancing priorities. It becomes more real. It becomes more real when you have a family, and it was fantastic. I tell you, the birth of my daughter, but then I realized. And I'm somebody, growing up, I'm someone who actually never had a pet before. So, I didn't even know, never cared for a dog or a cat or a goldfish. But then here's this human being we bring home from the hospital. And it's like, what do we do now? So I put into perspective that, work is important. It's important. But for me, and I have a very loving, caring family. I'm very appreciative of my wife and my daughter. But I think a really pivotal moment is you kind of do wake up and you say, geez, work is not the be all and end all. That you have someone you're responsible for, someone else that you're responsible for, and on a lighter side, it also introduces new terms and things into your lexicon that you never thought of before. And things that you don't think about at work. But I'm appreciative of it because you also have a bit of empathy for those that are other parents and working parents. My favorite term that was coined is the daycare dash, and I think parents will understand this. Where you have a young child that's not in school, you've got priorities and work at your job site that you have to finish, but the daycare closes at a certain time. So you kind of rush out of work, you do the daycare dash because you promised your daughter you won't be the last child that we're going to pick up. And the daycare doesn't also, they have times where they have to close. So there's new terms and new terms in your lexicon that are introduced that I think actually have meaning, that people, it's easy for me now to look back. At the time, it probably wasn't funny, the daycare dash, but now it is.
It was more done in a state of panic than anything else. It's like, yeah, I got to pick up. And I'm at the age now where I don't have any kids of my own, but I'm at the age where my close friends they've been married or partnered for a while, and they are having kids. Some of them have had kids for a couple of years, and so I've learned a bit through them about their challenges with especially those first few years before kids are in school. And I have a close friend who works as a nurse. Him and his wife work both as nurses, and man, their schedule is just like it's wild. Just looking at, because they work shift work, like 12-hour shifts, and so they have to balance each of their schedules. Like one will work nights, one will work days, and then they have to go to a special daycare that's open at night when they do both have a night shift. And it's just like, it gives me an appreciation for how, it kind of, in some ways, so many people do it, raise families and work and stuff, and maybe it just sounds kind of banal to say it that way, but hearing the details of what parents do to keep it all together, it's wild to me. And it's inspiring, and it makes me never want to complain about being tired.
Yes. I can totally relate, and I see it now, and as I say, it gives you a new perspective, and maybe that you don't really appreciate it at the time, but now looking back, and your question about pivotal moments, you do have to kind of look back and pause and think about it. But if you'd asked me that, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have brought it up. I would just be like, life is tough. I have to juggle these things. But now I actually very appreciative. And I think there's a lot more empathy, and you're absolutely right. There's others that are going through it. And I just think it gives you grounding, gives you good perspective and context for other people and yourself.
Mm-hmm. So what when you brought your daughter home from the hospital, like what I like what you said about, that was so honest about, well, you bring your kid home from the hospital and then you look at your wife and you say like, well, what do we do now? Like, because you go from having all these professionals in the hospital kind of holding your hand through all this stuff, especially if especially if you're not used to being around small children and stuff like that, like which I'm not. I have nieces and nephews, but so what changed in your thinking or your mindset right when you took, like, what was going through your head?
I think first it's the elation. It's the happiness, the elation. We have a daughter. We have a very healthy daughter, but it really dawned on me. And when we came home from the hospital and we brought our daughter home, and it was more like, hey, I actually have to be more responsible. We actually have to be adults. What are we going to do? And as I said, luckily my wife's had pets before, to care for something. I've never actually had to care for something. I've never had, even goldfish. So it really did hit home. But I think it puts into perspective, I think everybody needs to look at the bigger picture of things. We think about our careers, we think about, work, and yes, work can be stressful, life can be stressful. But I think the moment that hit me is more, I'm responsible for this baby here and growing up, and I have an opportunity of raising her and shaping how she thinks and making sure she makes right decisions. Again, it's more you kind of do grow up, even though we're in midlife, we're adults, but you honestly really do grow up and you look at life differently. And I think part of it is, I say, adapting. I think there's a theme here that I can see in my career, in my life. A lot of it is adapting. It wasn't so much. I know we wanted to have kids. It wasn't like, hey, we weren't going to have kids or we weren't going to do certain things, but it becomes real when you bring your daughter home or when you do certain things. It becomes more real, and adapting to the situation and making sure you make right decisions and you do the right things and you minimize the risks. Those are things I think you need to be mindful of.
One of my close friends had a second child about 2 years ago now, or something like that. And the one of the things he told me that he's learned being a young dad and stuff is just you get so efficient at doing stuff because you don't have any other choice. You don't have the luxury of time that you used to have when you were partnered but didn't have kids, and even before that, before you were partnered. It's like you had all the time in the world and you just didn't realize it. But when you have kids, it's like, man, you've got a minute and a half to pull some lunch together for yourself because things have time has gotten away from you in the morning, and you need to make drop off and then get to work, and so what can you grab in a minute and a half from the fridge? And you just get like you just get so efficient at things because you don't have a choice.
I think you're absolutely right. You're real life project managers, because you do have to kind of juggle, schedule things, fit things in. You never thought of it, but it's true. It's absolutely true. We have this immense time. You have this luxury of time that you never really used before kids, and when our daughter came along, we realized, geez, we didn't realize we had so much time. And I think, we talk about these things like, being efficient and being smart and how to organize your day and organize your work. But really, you become really good at it as a parent, because you have to juggle things, especially working parents. You have work, you've got home commitments. I mentioned the daycare dash. You have to think about getting dinner ready and what that routine will be the next day and the day after that.
It's like, time management becomes less of a principle or a talking point, and more just like a do or die.
Yes.
Thing. So after you had your daughter, what was going on at work at that time? You were, what was going on at work?
It was an adjustment. It's never easy. People say you'll make that adjustment, but at that time the light bulb goes off. That work-life balance becomes real, and it's no longer about you. It's your family as well. Work. I've been so happy and privileged that I've got different assignments and things that I've had an opportunity to work on in my career, that there's different things I can talk about. And one of the things that happened in the early 2000s was the creation of the Vancouver Drug Treatment Court. It was a second drug treatment court in Canada. Toronto had the first, and this would be around 1999, 2000. And it was an opportunity. Government said we had an opportunity to create a drug treatment court, which is an alternative to for individuals that committed crimes that had a drug addiction problem or issue. It was to provide an alternative than incarceration. It was to provide some supports like housing. It was to provide counseling. It was basically help individuals so that they could actually use an alternative than incarceration or some other means in terms of the justice system.
So, was it anyone who had committed or allegedly had committed a crime that also had an issue with drugs and or alcohol, or was it just for crimes related to like possession of drugs and stuff like that? Like, did the crime have to be drug related, or was it just a factor of the person who had?
At the time, it was drug-related crimes. It would be possession, and it was it required the federal government, federal Crown prosecutors that prosecute drug offenses. They were partnering with that program, and it's been it's been running for a number of years, decades now. I think at the time, what was interesting was why I think was a fascinating project was the government of the day here in BC wanted this to move forward, and there was limited funding. There was a shorter time frame because an election was coming up at that time, a provincial election. But I think what was interesting about this project is, yes, you could throw all the money at this to create it. You can get the partnerships, you can get agreement from different agencies, you can get the supports in place. But there was one aspect of it that was quite interesting. You have the court component, like the courthouse. This is in Vancouver, downtown Vancouver, the 222 Main Street court. You've got the court infrastructure, you've got the prosecutors, you've got the police, the judiciary on board, you've got support services, you've got counseling, you've got addiction treatment, mental health services. The issue for us was, at that time, we needed another location or a building or a venue for the actual clients to go to when they're not in court. Like where would they go and get their counseling? Where would they go and seek their supports if they had to find housing? But because of the clientele and because of drug treatment, it was very hard to find a location in Vancouver or find a landlord that would rent this place, a space for us, the office for the program. And there's some requirements that we had to have, and we did not want it to be in the downtown east side, but it had to be close to the courthouse, which is at 222 Main Street.
Which is very close to Hastings and Maine, right? Like
That's
just
correct.
A couple blocks down
That's correct. One of the criteria is we didn't want it to be in that area because if these individuals were charged with an offense for possession or minor trafficking, you don't want them to be in that area. And they go back for their court appearance, but you want them close enough, but outside of that area of the downtown east side. And what was difficult was, even though you had all the pieces in place, agreements, partnerships, agreement by the federal government, it was really hard to get a landlord to say, yes, you can rent out this place. And finally, I think it was through connections. It was the program manager and myself. It's funny, it was just the two of us. And I think one day we were sort of just walking around to see where someplace may be that would rent. And I think the reason we actually got a place was because the landlord actually had a personal experience, someone in the family who had drug addiction issues that was sympathetic, and it was a very good location, and we were able to secure it that way. But there was a lot of folks that did not want clients or these individuals, in a place in their building, or didn't want to rent.
Mm-hmm. It's that whole mentality of, that's a great program, but I don't want it in my backyard. It's that whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Or you get similar stuff with helping organizations that are trying to house people or that sort of thing, or provide services, and everyone. Not everyone, but a lot of people are supportive in principle of the idea, but I don't want to have to interact with those type of people is kind of a mentality that exists, and you can see that in Vancouver with the protests against the affordable housing modular units that the city was installing, and neighbors were protesting and that sort of thing. But it's good that you were able to find a location. And is that still, how long did that operate, the Vancouver Drug Treatment Court?
I think it's still operating. It's been this was the 2000s.
Like almost 20 years ago.
Almost 20 years ago, and I'm sure there's others. I've lost touch with this, but there's some things that people didn't realize. It was a bit of a struggle, and maybe I'm being a little too blunt to say it was hard. I don't think we were actually told, hey, we don't want these clients, but that
was the sense.
That was the effect and sense, and going back, that was the difficulties, and also finding the right space configuration as well.
Right, I'm sure you had some parameters that you were working with too. So, in terms of moving through your career, and we've heard about some of the different roles you worked in, from starting work on the statistics for court services and court wait times to an issues management position, and then working as an executive director. And I'm sure there's a couple of positions in between there, but I'm wondering, as you've moved through your career, has there been any wisdom passed on to you that sticks out, or that you keep coming back to?
I really like, and this maybe it's me. I think really is my approach in work and in life is to try and actually be as kind and supportive to others as you can. And others might have different approaches, but I really value and appreciate the people I work for and people I work with. For me, that personal connection, supporting people, being kind, it doesn't. We all have deadlines. The work can be stressful wherever we are, but I really try and make it a fun place and to be kind to people. I'm a very quirky type person in terms of how I like to approach things, and fun is an important thing for me in terms of connections in the workplace. So those are things that I don't know if people have imparted on me, but I've seen it. But it's kind of things that I'd like to do. I'd like to actually set that tone or set that environment in terms of a work environment, in terms of a place, to actually have a kind, supportive workplace, but also have make it a fun workplace as well.
What came up for you? What came up for me rather, when you were speaking was when you were talking about kindness, was a quote, and it's escaping me who said it or who it's attributed to, but the quote is something like this: "Be kind whenever possible. It is always possible." And so, for me, I think it is. When you were talking about the workload demands and how things get busy, sometimes it's very easy to be kind and warm to people when you feel that sort of openness. But there are times in our work, and there's certainly been times in my work when I've felt like overloaded, stressed out, because either because I've been assigned a lot of work or I've taken on too much. That's more usually the case with me. But it's those times when I'm really stressed out or feeling overworked or whatever, when it's difficult to be kind. Sometimes, especially when you're impatient, that's something I need to work on is patience, because I can, especially when I get stressed, I can get really terse with myself and with others, and so yeah, it just makes me think of compassion, and I'm trying to get back into meditation, do the self-compassion thing and compassion for others, and work from that place, but I could do better.
Well, I agree. I think for everybody, I agree. It's not an easy thing, but if you think about it, though, and try, and it doesn't always work for every circumstance, I know, but I try and make it kind of an effort. Everybody has their struggles. Everybody has different timelines and stressful situations and too much work. We all do, but I think that support piece as well, like the kindness, but also to support each other. And we're in the public service. We're helping people. It's a fantastic place to work. I think we also need to support each other in terms of the workplace.
Do you meditate at all?
I don't.
You don't?
I don't.
I'm wondering what you attribute your, you strike me as someone who's pretty like even keel and calm. And that could be just a part of who you are rather than something you do. But where do you think that's from? Like
I think I try very consciously to do it, and I have this thing where I try not to swear, even though it's so easy. And I mean, it is really easy sometimes. It doesn't have to be at work, but I have this thing where I try not to. I think I'm more of a practical type person, and I'm more those that know me, I'm a half glass full kind of a person. So I always look at the positive side of things, and I think, yes, you could be very stressed, and you could be less kind to people. But I'm thinking, when this episode or this incident passes, where are you? You want to look at that. Yes, it might be a terrible situation that we're in right now because we got these deadlines and things to finish, or I've got too much work. But it can't go on forever, and that's sort of my half glass full kind of view, and maybe just my outlook, being a practical kind of a person. And I don't try and dwell on the negative or dwell on, hey, I've got too much work here. But, that it can't go on forever. So something's got to change.
Well, it's a shame that you didn't have like a meditation technique to teach me. I was going to dive in and figure out how to get as calm as you appear. So is there a reason why you try not to swear? Is that like being a dad? Is that just you're shaking your head?
No, I don't think that's the case. I think because it is so easy. I think it's more, it's your outlook. It's your outlook on life. And it's funny. I know of people that it's like second nature, or they don't even think about it. It's easy to swear. And I think when people hear me or see me swear, they know something is up. But you kind of just bite your tongue and not do it, because, like I say, it comes back, when the episode or incident or whatever causing you grief or stress passes, do you really want that to stick? And again, that goes back to my outlook of, try and be kind to others, because they're probably in the same situation or a worse situation than you are, and we all have things to do in life and at work, and why not have this happy half glass full view of life?
That's such a positive way to look at your life and look at challenges. And even though you don't meditate, what I'm hearing you describe is like really mindfulness about the way that you speak, and also about the way that you interact with people and all that sort of stuff. So if you were to think about what we need more of, like corporately in the BC Public Service, not just the justice sector and not just the ministry I'm from or whatever, like public servants in the BC Public Service, like what do you think we're going to need more of in the future to be successful as a public service?
That's a tough question. Not one I really thought of. I think I'd start small first, rather than the big picture answer. I really think that to equip folks in the public service, I think we actually need do a little better job in terms of I don't want to say training. We need a little more help and supports of kind of how how the world works or how their workplace works. And I know we do onboarding, but I wasn't thinking anything as formal as that. It's hard for me to describe, but I'll give you an example. We do a very good job of onboarding, and I put quotes here that people can't see. Here's your manual, or here's what we do. Welcome to the public service. But I think there's the smaller stuff is what people kind of want to know about. And I'll give you an example. Our onboarding is more like, hey, welcome to our office and welcome to our floor. Hey, you know what? I just want to let you know this is where the washroom is, or here's where the kitchen is. It's not like here's our code of conduct. Yes, you need the code of conduct, but that's what I meant by the small stuff. There's some more personal things that I think we need. And I'm starting small here, but it applies to different roles and things. You could be an executive director, you could be an ADM, you could be a deputy. There's the smaller stuff things, not like, hey, here's the service plan, or here's the mandate letter. It's more like, hey, if you actually have to go to this committee, this is what you're going to see. Here's some logistics things, or here's who's who. Those are some of the things I think we could do a little better job of, a little more personal connections. And if I take it up a notch, the supports that I would see is more, how do you actually build that into a little more fulsome in terms of, here's what you kind of need to know, not just today, this week, or this year, but if you're going to go into the public service, here's some things that would be helpful for you. Not the technical things of here's what this ministry does, but here's some things that you can help contribute, or here's why we do some things. I think it's more that context and explaining the small stuff. Mm-hmm. It's like, for example, where the bathroom is. People might not think of that, but I'm thinking, yeah, it's probably good to let you know, or, it might be in the onboarding, but I'm just thinking that's just an example of something. Or here's where the kitchen is, and you know what, and the tea is free, and the kettle's here. Make yourself a cup of tea. Those are small stuff that I don't know. Maybe we don't pay that much attention to, or maybe we do. I don't know.
That's nice. What I'm hearing you say is that kind of, it's not any one thing, and it's not broad strokes, here's our strategic plan or whatever, even though that stuff is good and good information to have, but it's more the details about getting people the information they need. I agree. I think we should show people where the washrooms are. I completely agree. Yeah. And while you were talking, something I was just reflecting, I was listening to you as well, but I was also thinking that what my best onboarding experiences have been like, and what pieces I really appreciated from new managers or supervisors, whoever was supervising me. And I think if I had to kind of summarize it, what I've appreciated most when I'm starting a new position or I'm brought into a new role is when my supervisor introduces me to a lot of people. And encourages me, because all of those little technical pieces, how to get your tech up and running if your laptop isn't working, how to, what this working group is all about, what this piece of work is all about. You can get that information from a lot of different places, and you can just kind of go to people as you need that information. So it's maybe not all that helpful to have a huge binder or huge big training at the beginning of a role that tells you all the details. But that's what I've appreciated from my supervisors in the past. And so I try to pass that along to my staff too, is just introduce them around, especially to friendly and helpful people and people they are going to interact with. Make a point of it, and then also just encourage them to so they can build that confidence really quickly.
Just on that point, and maybe that's what I'm trying to get at, is be welcoming and be supportive. And I used to use the bathroom example. I just couldn't think of any. But there's small things that people overlook. How do you get through that? Your first day? How do you get through your first week? And all the technical stuff we're very good at. All the things of, like you say, here's your computer, here's the drives, here's where the files are. But that stuff people can pick up, but it's the personal connection and things. What do you need to do to get through your day or get through that week? And welcoming. Maybe it's that welcoming to that office and knowing that you'll be well supported.
Well, thanks for your wise words, Toby. I really appreciate you taking the time to come down to the public service agency here where we record these, yeah, thanks so much for joining me, and yeah, I hope you'll come back another time.
I'd love to. Thank you, Jonathan.
That was my conversation with Toby Louie, and thanks for listening to Leadcast. I think the thing that blows me away the most about that conversation is that Toby does not meditate at all. Like, I wish you could have been here in the room and seen how calm and serene he is. Man, I wish I could be that calm.